So as always, greetings from Pennsylvania once again, and we are back here in Shirleysburg, Pennsylvania, where the location of Fort Shirley is. Of course, we filmed here earlier this summer. The location is back. This is that spot where I was filming and the dogs are barking at me, but then the landowner gave me permission. He took me out to where the location of Fort Shirley was. So that was pretty cool. Let me show you the spot again. Yeah, Fort Shirley was just out in this field right out here during the French and Indian War. 1755, 1756 time frame. Of course, we were just, I think it was parked up a little bit further up that way. The dogs are barking at me, but they turned out to be really nice dogs though, so that was cool. But we are here for another reason today. We're here to be at Fort Shirley. This is where the Kittanning expedition started. You've seen the title of the video, and I've been talking about doing this for a while now. Earlier, back in May, we did Braddock's expedition. Now it's time for the Kittanning expedition. This was a much smaller one. There's only a force of about 300 men, all from Pennsylvania. It's interesting because this is the first true offensive from the colonial government of Pennsylvania, you could say. Remember, they were Quakers, the people who controlled Pennsylvania at the time. They're pacifists. So for them to allow this to happen was actually quite a big thing, this Kittanning expedition. We'll talk more about it. I'm actually making my way out to Kittanning. Let me show you a map, what the plan is. So here is our Pennsylvania map, and we are currently right about here. Right here's Mount Union. Shirleysburg is just down here a little bit more, where Fort Shirley is located. And we're going to be going all the way out here to the town of Kittanning, which was the objective of this attack. We're actually going to be stopping here at Yellow Creek State Park a little bit too. And then of course, this is one of my big road trips. We're gonna be headed up other places too later on. So eventually we'll finish this video out in the town of Kittanning, out in Armstrong County. That name should sound familiar too, but I think we're gonna head out from here. I think once I get to Yellow Creek State Park, I'm gonna do some filming there, but I'll talk more about what this expedition was, why it happened, what the goals were. I know we've talked about a little bit in some other videos, but we'll cover those things again, and eventually we'll make it to Kittanning. So I'm gonna get back on the road, got about an hour and a half drive to Yellow Creek, and then I'll meet back up with you there. All right, so we are now here in Yellow Creek State Park, doing some hiking, filming another video. Let's talk about the Kittanning expedition again. So I already mentioned, I believe, that the Kittanning expedition was kind of unique because it was the first time that Pennsylvania went on the offensive during the French and Indian War. Like I said, our government tended to be more of a pacifist government with the Quakers in charge of things. Because during Braddock's expedition in 1755, no Pennsylvanians were a part of that expedition. Beautiful butterfly going off there. So what was the purpose of the Kittanning expedition? Well, on August 2nd, of course there were multiple raids and massacres occurring in the area due to the Native Americans, influenced by the French as well, to make these raids and attacks and massacres on the settlers in the areas. And we talked about a number of those in other videos, but one in particular, Fort Granville, was captured by a chief named Captain Jacobs, which I believe I already inserted that film prior to this one. I believe I haven't filmed that one yet as of this video. I was kind of hoping to get that done before I start this trip, but I think I'm going to film it later and then jump it up ahead. But yeah, Captain Jacobs was responsible for that attack on Fort Granville. It was defeated, burned to the ground. Most of the inhabitants, the people that took refuge in it, were taken prisoner, captive, some killed. And the one that was killed in charge of the fort was, I believe his name was Edward Armstrong, who was the younger brother of Colonel John Armstrong, who at the time was still just lieutenant colonel. And of course we did a video on John Armstrong as well. We went to the cemetery where he was buried and talked about his career. So in some ways, there's multiple reasons for this expedition. One was to try to rescue those captives taken. But I believe there was another objective, which was a bit of revenge, not just for the attacks and raids, but for the killing of John Armstrong's younger brother. Because John Armstrong led that expedition. So no doubt there was a bit of vengefulness on his part, which he wouldn't necessarily be wrong about. So it is called the Kittanning expedition because they were headed to the Indian village of Kittanning, which in a lot of ways was kind of like a staging front for a lot of the attacks that were going on
on the settlers. And that's where the prisoners or the captives had been taken to as well. So the objective was Kittanning, and was now Armstrong County. That's where we're going to be headed after we're hiking here. And the final results of the Kittanning expedition are a bit iffy as to how successful it actually was. Some of their goals were achieved, some were not. In some ways they may have made things worse, but we'll talk about when we get to Kittanning. Also going to stop at one other place. There's a place called Blanket Hill. There's a little monument there called the Battle of Blanket Hill. It wasn't a full-on battle, but it's part of this expedition, but we'll talk about that. Hopefully I can find that on the way to Kittanning. Don't just drive right past it, but all right, I'll see you probably there at that monument next, and then we'll get to actually Kittanning itself and talk about what happened at the actual battle. Okay, well right here is the monument. I didn't end up driving past it. There's the old monument and the new one here. Blanket Hill. So named from the blankets left by the Armstrong expedition, the Kittanning expedition. After destroying Kittanning, here also was a stopping point of the troops en route to attack the Indians September 7th, 1756. And then here's the older monument. Blanket Hill. Sorry, it's really busy right here. Colonel John Armstrong, about 300 frontiersmen from Cumberland County, stopped September 7th. Yeah, he left Lieutenant James Hogg here to watch a band of Indians at a nearby campsite. And the next morning, Lieutenant Hogg attacked this band of Indians and was killed with a number of his men. All right, but let's get out of this busy place. We'll talk more about what happened here when we get to Kittanning itself. Well, we have finally made it to Kittanning itself. The town is up that way. I'm down here by the river. This is the Allegheny River. Some beautiful views out there. Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah, so somewhere around here was the old Indian town, old Native American town of Kittanning. Of course, nowadays it's a modern town as well. Not exactly sure where the Indian village itself was, but we're in the area. Yeah, so where we were at the beginning of this video, Fort Shirley, Armstrong and his men met there on August 31st, and they reached Blanket Hill, where we were September 7th, and then they came to Kittanning on September 8th, and that's when the battle occurred. So it took them just a little over a week to get here. You know what? You gotta remember, this is not like Braddock's expedition, where there was thousands of troops, where they're carrying, you know, they had wagons of supplies, cannons. They were building a road. For Armstrong's expedition, you know, the Kittanning expedition, it was just 300 men. They weren't building a road. They were following existing Native American paths to get here. They weren't bringing along supply wagons and cannons and stuff like that. So they were able to get here a lot faster than Braddock's expedition. And it'll be the same for Forbes' expedition, which we'll cover later. That was in 1758. That was a huge expedition too, which took months. But this was just a smaller one. Yeah, so back that way, the way we came from, maybe 6 miles or so, was Blanket Hill. And it's called Blanket Hill because that's where they left a lot of their supplies. You know, they knew they were only like a half a day away or so from the village of Kittanning, which they're going to attack. So they left a lot of their supplies, including their blankets and things like that, and left a number of men behind to guard that supplies and to keep watch over an Indian encampment that they had found there, while the main force headed here to Kittanning. Of course, that proved to be a bit of a problem for them then, because what they thought was just a small Indian encampment turned out to be quite a larger number of Native Americans than they thought were there. Because as I mentioned, they left Lieutenant James Hogg behind to watch over supplies and be in charge of the troops that were left there. But I think the following morning, on the 8th, when this battle was taking place here on the 8th, Hogg and some of his men decided to attack that encampment, only to discover that there wasn't just like a couple of Indians there was quite a few. And that didn't go well for them. And those events at Blanket Hill also affected, in some ways, the outcome of this battle here. Because news reached the rest of the troops that were here of that larger Indian encampment and what its purpose was. They realized they kind of made a mistake, leaving so few men behind. because it turned out that that's, you know, small little Indian encampment that they found at Blanket Hill was actually another raid that was headed out to attack the settlers here more in eastern PA. And they caught wind of that here at Kittanning during the battle. Of course, that kind of scared them because they realized the encampment that they came across was much larger than they realized. And yeah, so anyway, let's get back to the battle itself and what happened here and the results of it. I'm just kind of walking along the riverside here. It's a nice little park here. They got some neat things here. So on the morning of September 8th, they were able to surprise the Indians here in this village with the attack. But many of the Indians fled across the river here, the Allegheny River, were able to escape. But they did get, remember one of their goals was Captain Jacobs. He was the one, you know, that attacked Fort Granville and several other of the raids on the settlers. They were able to, sorry, there's a lot of kids playing down there. They were able to capture him. He died in the battle. Like I said, a lot of the Indians fled across the river here, the Native Americans. But he holed up in his house with his family. But they were able to get his house on fire. And he had a bunch of gunpowder in his house, which apparently exploded too. Made quite a bang. But at some point, he ran out of his house and he was gunned down. And some accounts say that the same thing happened to his wife and his one son, that they escaped, that they tried to escape too but were shot. So he was taken, he was scalped. There was a reward for his scalp, which was taken back to Philadelphia. No one quite knows what happened to that scalp though. So yeah, Jacobs was captured in a sense. Then one of the other goals was to rescue a bunch of the captives that had been taken during the fall of Fort Granville. They were somewhat successful with that. I think they recovered 11 of those captives, but unfortunately a lot of them, when a lot of the Native Americans fled across the river, they took most of the captives with them. So only 11 were rescued. You know, so was this battle a win for those Pennsylvania troops? It is somewhat debatable. You know, one thing is the Pennsylvania troops, they suffered more casualties than what they inflicted during the battle. Like I said, most of the Native Americans fled across the river with the captives that they were trying to rescue. And the result was they took those captives even farther west towards Ohio and stuff like that. And most of those weren't recovered until about 1764 after Pontiac's War. And also, in some ways, it also agitated the Indians even more to continue doing more raids. So was it successful? I don't know. I mean, they did inflict a blow upon the Native Americans here. Like, this was a staging point for a lot of their raids, but I don't know. It's one of those things where the outcome, it's kind of iffy if it was worthwhile or not. You could determine for yourself. You can, from my video, or just run your own research. But you know, it happened. It's history, and we're here just to learn about it. And then back to the whole Blanket Hill thing. During the battle and just after it, they heard rumors of that other Indian raid and that larger Indian encampment, and they kind of retreated here maybe a bit prematurely to go, because they were a bit worried about what was going on back there at Blanket Hill. And so the retreat here was a bit haphazard. The men were a bit scattered. It was a little bit chaotic. And of course they encountered, most of the men that were left at Blanket Hill were killed. They encountered a lot of those guys there. So that was a bit of a disaster there at Blanket Hill. So if you picture yourself back in that time, September 8th of 1756, up here the village would be up in flames. You hear gunshots, that big explosion of the gunpowder. Many of the Native Americans would be fleeing across the river in their canoes, taking the captives with them and heading off that direction. It would be a rather chaotic scene. But nowadays it looks like this. You would never know, unless you knew the history. So there you go, that is the Kittanning expedition, kind of a summarization of it. As with all these videos, if you want to learn more details about it, you can do your own research about it. I kind of give a basic summary of what happened during these expeditions. It's still an interesting one. It was one I had never really heard of until I started doing this series on the French and Indian War. You hear about Braddock's expedition, Forbes' expedition, but you don't hear so much about this one. And once again, you can let me know what you think in the comments, whether this battle was worthwhile or successful. Kind of interesting to see what your opinion is. Alright, but I think that'll be it. We made it here to Kittanning. But unlike Armstrong and his troops, we're not headed back. Yeah, they all made it. Most of them made it back to Fort Loud, and they didn't go back to Fort Shirley where they started out. But anyway, so we're gonna keep going. I'm headed up to, hopefully, to try and get to the. We're in Armstrong County here. Hopefully, trying to get to the high point of Armstrong County. We'll see how that goes, and then we're headed to a special place for the next 2 nights to camp. All right, thanks for coming along with me on the Kittanning expedition, and we'll see you on the next one.